Picture a London of contrasts, where gleaming streets and grand townhouses give way to a shadowy labyrinth of alleyways and crumbling tenements. Step into St. Giles, a place of promise turned infamous, where fortune and misfortune walked hand in hand. Here, condemned men paused for a final drink, daring thieves danced through the hidden passageways, and history unfolded in dark corners. This is the story of St. Giles Rookery, London's most infamous slum. Let's begin at the heart of London's West End, where Bloomsbury now boasts elegant townhouses, neoclassical public buildings, and the grand sprawl of university campuses. But rewind to the 17th century, and you'll find a very different scene, one of quiet prosperity, a place meant to rival nearby Covent Garden and Drury Lane in status. St. Giles was born from ambitious plans, a promising parish stretching from Holborn to the north and Soho to the west. Its streets were laid out with care, its church, St. Giles in the Fields, standing as a beacon of the community. If you were to pass by 300 years ago, you could have walked past number 6 and 7 Denmark Street, proud early houses built between 1686 and 1691. Hints of the area's brief dalliance with respectability, and it gives us a glimpse of the surrounding architecture at the time. Yet, St. Giles never quite became the elite postcode it aspired to be. Some believe it was the land itself, marshy and prone to flooding, that turned its fortunes and opened the door to the influx of working-class families, drawn by lower rents and looser social hierarchies. Either way, by the late 1600s, the seeds of change were sown. Over 2,000 homes dotted the parish by the end of Charles II's reign. And within just a few decades, that number ballooned to over 3,000, a chaotic patchwork of cramped tenements and grander homes slowly crumbling under the weight of time and neglect. The golden age of St. Giles was brief, but its remnants can still be seen today, if you know where to look. Even now, St. Giles in the Fields stands, a silent witness to both its elegant beginnings and the dark days that followed. It's a reminder that every neighbourhood, no matter how polished today, holds shadows of the past. The prosperity of St. Giles was fleeting. By the early 18th century, a darker chapter was unfolding. The once promising streets began to buckle under the weight of rapid, unplanned expansion. What had once been an elegant neighbourhood turned into a tangled web of alleyways and courtyards, a honeycomb of decaying homes and shadowy passageways. Immigrants, labourers, and those on the margins of society found refuge here. By 1816, the area's infamous Holy Land, a dense enclave of Irish immigrants, housed over 6,000 adults and thousands of children. It wasn't just the Irish who settled in St. Giles though. The neighbourhood also became home to London's first distinct black community, known as the St. Giles Blackbirds. And as the population swelled, so did the problems. Overcrowding led to disease, filth, and despair. The houses, once aspirational, now crumble beneath the weight of makeshift additions and subdivided rooms. Gardens vanished, replaced by hastily constructed tenements. Streets darkened, narrowed, and took on an air of menace. And then there was gin. Forget the artisan gin of today. This homebrew was cheap, potent, and deadly. By the mid-18th century, St. Giles became synonymous with what became known as the Gin Craze, a time when 1 in 5 of these houses doubled as a gin shop. Hogarth's haunting print, Gin Lane, captured the chaos. Mothers neglecting children, men slumped in stupors, and the spectre of death looming over all. It wasn't just an artist's exaggeration. The alcoholic epidemic devastated the area, with commentators horrified at the consequences. One observer lamented how the poor, lured into these gin dens with the promise of a short-lived reprieve from their struggles, became incapable of work, leaving their bodies weakened and vulnerable to disease. There are even records of Mother Judith Dufour murdering a child in order to pawn its new clothes, obtained from the workhouse, to pay for more gin. St. Giles, once a hopeful parish, was now a cautionary tale, a place where the streets themselves seemed to transform to reflect the human suffering they hosted. Imagine travelling down the Holborn High Road in the early 18th century, passing bustling taverns and shadowy alleys. For some, this journey had a grim purpose. Condemned prisoners would stop at St. Giles for a final drink, one last draught of ale, during their long cart trip from Newgate Prison to the gallows at Tyburn. This tradition, known as One for the Road, was observed at the infamous Angel Inn, still standing today. This idea began when the condemned were offered a carved wooden bowl of strong ale outside the churchyard gate, known as the St. Giles Bowl. It served as one last draught to ease the passage to the next life, and this ritual continued long after the gallows was moved from this corner of the churchyard to Tyburn in Paddington. In fact, many executed criminals and slum residents alike have been buried in this churchyard, with St. Giles in the Fields also having the most dubious honour of being the starting point of the Great Plague of 1665. The most legendary of these condemned processions involved a name that comes up often in my videos. It's of course Jack Sheppard, the charismatic thief whose daring escapes from prison made him a folk hero. On the day of his execution, thousands gathered to watch his final journey. It's said that Sheppard refused the St. Giles Bowl, instead vowing that his nemesis, the corrupt thief-taker Jonathan Wild, would soon taste from the bowl himself. Amazingly, the prophecy would come true. Wild met the hangman's noose just 6 months later. But it wasn't only the condemned who drank at St. Giles. The area's taverns were notorious dens of vice. The Maidenhead Inn, the Eagle of Child, and the infamous Rat's Castle catered to a clientele of thieves, gamblers, and con artists. Inside these dark, smoke-filled rooms, deals were struck, plans hatched, and reputations made or broken. The Angel Inn, or the Bowl as it was known for a time, gained notoriety not just for its connection to the gallows, but for its role in London's criminal underworld. Within its walls, rogues and rebels gathered, finding camaraderie in the shared defiance of authority. A recent archaeological dig at the heart of the former slum uncovered sections of the Eagle and Child's cobbled courtyard, a footprint of real-life St. Giles hidden in plain sight. Welcome to the notorious St. Giles Rookery, a labyrinth of narrow alleyways, hidden passageways, and crumbling tenements where life teetered on the edge of lawlessness. By the early 19th century, this warren had become a byword for squalor and vice, earning a reputation as one of London's most dangerous slums. Here, space was a luxury few could afford. Houses were carved into tiny, makeshift lodgings, often with multiple families crammed into a single room. Beds were rented by the night, 6p for the whole one, 4p for the half. And for the truly desperate, there were cribs in backyards, little more than straw-strewn corners where you could sleep for threepence. The air was thick with the stench and sound of human misery. Disease ran rampant, fueled by the overcrowding and the lack of basic sanitation. One observer described the rookery as a honeycomb of courts and cul-de-sacs, where narrow passageways led to dead ends, and it offered the perfect hideout for criminals. And the criminals were in abundance. The rookery was a home to a corporation of whores, coiners, sweaters, highwaymen, bawds, pickpockets, and housebreakers, as one contemporary put it. Among the most notorious dens were the Rat's Castle Tavern and Mother Doling's lodging house, where vagrants and villains alike found refuge. Even the police feared entering this maze, and when they did, they came in force, often to face mobs of residents ready to protect their own. Hidden trapdoors, sliding panels, and underground tunnels made it almost impossible to catch fugitives. Stories abound of officers chasing thieves into rooms, only to find them vanish through secret passages. Amidst the filth and crime, there was a strange sense of community. The residents of the rookery, despite their circumstances, looked out for one another. It was a world of mutual support, where survival depended on solidarity. One of the Rookery's darkest moments came in 1814 with the Great Beer Flood. A massive vat at the Horseshoe Brewery burst, unleashing a 15-foot tidal wave of porter that swept through the streets, knocking down walls and flooding the cellars where many of the poorest lived. The site of the brewery is where the Dominion Theatre is today, on the corner of where St Giles meets Tottenham Court Road. 8 people were known to have drowned, and countless others drank themselves into oblivion amidst the chaotic aftermath, with some basements left waist-high in beer. It seems a cruel irony that alcohol would lead to such devastation in the slum once again. For all its horrors, the St Giles Rookery was a place of resilience, a grim but fascinating chapter in London's history, where every corner told a story. By the mid-19th century, St Giles had come to symbolise everything that the Victorian reformers sought to change. The squalor, the crime, the overcrowding were inescapable, and the call for renewal was growing louder, pushing London towards a future of progress. The first steps towards this change were cautious and measured. In 1844, ambitious plans emerged to carve new roads through the Rookery, breaking up the slum's dense network of alleys. Shaftesbury Avenue and New Oxford Street emerged from this vision, not merely thoroughfares, but tools of social engineering designed to push the poor out and make way for a more respectable class. Yet, change didn't come easily. For years, displaced residents simply moved deeper into the surviving maze of back streets. The slum clung to life, even as the world around it modernised. Basic infrastructure like drainage, sewage, and waste disposal remained woefully inadequate, while diseases continued to fester in the damp, overcrowded conditions. But beneath the surface, the seeds of reform were beginning to take root. Churches and missions appeared, offering food, education, and spiritual guidance. The Bloomsbury Chapel, built in 1848 by Sir Samuel Morton Petto, stood as a beacon of hope. Nestled on Dudley Street, it stood at the crossroads between the genteel squares of Bloomsbury and the grim reality of St Giles, offering a bridge between the two worlds. Inside, children from the slum were given nourishing meals and a chance at a better life. James Greenwood, a journalist who visited St Giles in the 1870s, noted a persistence of hardship. There used to be scarcely a house in front of which there was not a hole in the pavement and a ladder by which the underground lodgers descended into their lairs. Even after decades of reform, St Giles' struggle for improvement was far from over. Amidst this transformation, the Princess Louise, one of the last and most ornate gin palaces, stood in stark contrast to the grim conditions just outside its doors. Built amidst the reforms of the 1870s, its warm oil lamps and elegant decor beckoned punters from the darkness, offering a taste of luxury within reach of the working class. Yet, despite its grandeur, the Princess Louise didn't entirely escape the shadow of the gin craze. Like its predecessors, it served cheap, potent gin, and while its decor was more refined, it still lured in vulnerable drinkers. The glittering facade masked a familiar danger, the same cycle of addiction that had once ravaged St Giles. In this way, the Princess Louise symbolised the uneasy balance between progress and continuity. It presented an air of respectability, yet remained tethered to the same intoxicating allure that had once devastated the neighbourhood. The transformation of St Giles gained momentum in the late 19th century, as slum clearance laws began to take effect. With Victorian Britain enjoying the fruits of a booming economy, urban renewal surged forward. Entire streets were demolished and replaced by wider roads and sturdier, brick-built housing. For the residents of St Giles, this was both a blessing and a curse. The Rookery, for all its dangers and hardships, was gone, but so too was the only home many had ever known. The slum had been a community, a place where people, despite their suffering, found ways to survive. And now, With the area rapidly transformed, those who remained had to find new ways to rebuild their lives in a rapidly changing world. By the dawn of the 20th century, St. Giles had shed its dark past. The Rookery was gone, replaced by grand avenues and modern buildings. But the story of its transformation was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a testament to how cities evolve, shedding layers while carrying echoes of what came before. The once notorious surrounding streets gave way to the wide expanse of Kingsway, a grand boulevard designed to link Holborn and the Strand. Its creation wasn't just about improving traffic flow. It symbolised progress and a deliberate effort to cleanse the area of its grim reputation. Fortunately for us nostalgics, not everything was erased. Landmarks like St. Giles in the Fields still stand, silent witnesses to centuries of change. Walk through the area today, and you might glimpse remnants of the old St. Giles. An ornate archway, a hidden alley, or the surviving Angel Inn, with its stories etched into its very walls. The memory of the Rookery lives on in literature and legend. Charles Dickens, who once wandered these streets under guard, immortalised the slum's shadows in novels like Oliver Twist. The tales of Jack Sheppard, Mother Doling, and the Rat's Castle have become part of London's fascinating history. St. Giles, now part of bustling central London, feels worlds away from its grim past. Its streets are filled with tourists, shoppers, and students, unaware of the ghosts that linger beneath their feet. Yet, if you imagine, you can almost hear the echoes of the past, the laughter from a long-lost tavern, the clinking of the St. Giles bowl, and the footsteps of those who walk the streets before us. This exploration of the site of St. Giles Rookery is more than just old streets and buildings. It's about ensuring that the stories of those who lived, loved, and struggled here are not forgotten. So next time you find yourself in this part of London, take a moment to pause. Look beyond the polished facades and bustling streets. St. Giles is still here, in the shadows, waiting to tell its story. I hope you enjoyed this exploration into St. Giles as much as I have, and as always, see you next time.